In a picturesque suburban neighborhood, where manicured lawns and orderly streets reign supreme, I found myself entangled in an unexpected conflict with a homeowners association. As a judge, I've always valued the rule of law, but nothing prepared me for the day I returned home to discover my car had been clamped for parking on my own property. It was a shocking violation that felt both personal and absurd. The scene was all too familiar. A well-intentioned HOA board enforcing its regulations, eager to maintain the community's aesthetic appeal. However, standing in my driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling of injustice. After all, I had parked my vehicle within the confines of my own property, a space I believed should be mine to manage. The clamping of my car not only disrupted my day, but also ignited a simmering frustration toward what I perceived as an overreach of authority by the HOA. As I looked around at the neatly aligned homes and vibrant flower beds, I realized this wasn't just about my car. It was about the balance of power in our community. How could a governing body impose such strict measures without considering individual circumstances? Little did they know, they were about to learn that their actions would draw the attention of someone well-versed in legal matters. My role as a judge would soon play a pivotal part in this unfolding drama. The incident began on an ordinary Saturday morning, when I parked my car in my driveway, a space that had always been considered part of my property. It was a routine I had followed countless times without issue. However, that day, I returned home to find my vehicle immobilized by a bright orange clamp, a stark reminder of the HOA's reach. Confused and frustrated, I scanned the vicinity for any signs or notices explaining this drastic action. To my dismay, there were none. The HOA had apparently decided that my car was violating some obscure parking regulation, but they had failed to communicate any recent changes to rules or guidelines. As I inspected the clamp affixed to my tire, I couldn't help but feel that this was an egregious overstep of authority. The HOA's rules were intended to maintain order and aesthetics within our community, but this situation felt like a blatant disregard for individual rights. In my mind, there was a clear distinction between maintaining property values and infringing upon personal liberties. The irony wasn't lost on me. As a judge, I had spent years upholding the law and ensuring fairness in various disputes. Yet here I was, standing in front of my own home, facing what felt like an unjust punishment for simply using my property as intended. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge not only their authority, but also the very fabric of community governance. As I stood there, staring at the clamp holding my car hostage, a wave of emotions washed over me: frustration, disbelief, and anger. How could the HOA justify such a drastic action against me, a homeowner who had always adhered to community standards? The feeling of being targeted was palpable. My mind raced with thoughts about the implications of the situation, not just for me personally, but for the broader dynamics of our neighborhood. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. The initial shock quickly transformed into a determination to confront this injustice head-on. I imagined the HOA representatives sitting in their meetings, formulating rules and penalties without any understanding of the individual homeowner's perspective. It felt as if they had forgotten that we were not just numbers in a ledger. We were members of a community, with lives and stories that deserved respect. In that moment, I knew I couldn't let this go unchallenged. As a judge, I had spent years advocating for fairness and justice in courtroom. Now, I found myself needing to advocate for my own rights in a different arena. I envisioned myself walking into the next HOA meeting armed with knowledge of property law and an unwavering resolve. This was more than just about retrieving my car. It was about standing up against what I perceived as an abuse of power and ensuring that my voice and the voices of fellow homeowners would be heard. To fully grasp the situation, it was essential to understand the authority of the Homeowners Association. HOAs are established to maintain property values and uphold community standards, creating a harmonious living environment for all residents. They are empowered to enforce rules and regulations that dictate everything from landscaping choices to parking policies. However, this power can sometimes lead to conflicts between individual homeowners and the collective interests of the community. As I delved deeper into the HOA's regulations, I discovered that many of their rules were crafted with good intentions, meant to prevent unsightly conditions and ensure a cohesive neighborhood aesthetic. However, I began to question whether these regulations were being applied judiciously or if they had transformed into an overzealous enforcement of control. The clamping of my car was a clear indication that the HOA had crossed a line, enforcing rules without considering context or individual circumstances. Moreover, I recognized a troubling trend. Many residents felt intimidated by the HOA's authority, often hesitant to challenge decisions for fear of repercussions. This created an environment where homeowners might feel powerless, leading to resentment and division within the community. As I reflected on my own position as a judge, I realized that understanding the delicate balance between authority and individual rights was crucial. Empowered by my legal background, I was ready to confront this imbalance head-on, advocating not only for myself, but for the rights of all homeowners who felt marginalized by an overreaching HOA. As I navigated the emotions swirling within me, I couldn't help but reflect on my background as a judge. With years of experience in the legal system, I had dedicated my career to upholding justice and ensuring that the law was applied fairly. My role had always been to balance the scales in disputes, whether they involved criminal cases or civil matters. Now, faced with an unexpected conflict in my own community, I found myself drawing upon that same expertise. Throughout my career, I had seen firsthand the impact of authority when wielded without accountability. I understood the intricacies of property law and the rights of homeowners, which positioned me uniquely in this situation. My knowledge provided me with a sense of empowerment, a realization that I was not just an average homeowner, but someone who possessed a deep understanding of legal principles. As a judge, my responsibility was to listen, analyze, and render decisions based on evidence and reason. This background fueled my determination to confront the HOA with clarity and confidence. I envisioned myself presenting a well-researched argument, advocating for my rights, while also addressing the broader implications for other residents who might feel similarly oppressed. This incident was more than a personal grievance. It was an opportunity to shine a light on the potential for abuse in community governance. With every court case I had presided over, I had fought for fairness and equity. Now it was time to take that fight beyond the courtroom and into my own neighborhood, ensuring that all voices would be heard and respected. With a sense of purpose driving me, I prepared for the upcoming HOA meeting, knowing that this confrontation would set the tone for how my dispute would unfold. As I walked into the community center, I could feel the tension in the air. Homeowners milled about, some exchanging glances of curiosity, while others appeared apprehensive. They were likely aware of my situation. Word had spread quickly in our tight-knit neighborhood. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood at the front of the room, taking a moment to gather my thoughts. The HOA board members sat before me, their expressions a mix of indifference and mild concern. I began by calmly recounting the events that led to my car being clamped, emphasizing that I had parked on my own property, a space I believed was rightfully mine to use. As I presented my case, I made sure to cite relevant rules and regulations, reinforcing that my understanding of property law was not just theoretical. I called attention to the lack of prior notification regarding any changes to parking regulations and questioned how such harsh measures could be justified without considering individual circumstances. The board members exchanged uneasy looks as they listened to my arguments. When I finished speaking, I felt a surge of empowerment. This was not just about reclaiming my car. It was about challenging an authority that had become overly controlling. As questions began to fly from the audience and board members attempted to defend their actions, it became clear this confrontation would spark a much-needed dialogue about fairness and community governance. As the confrontation unfolded, I seized the opportunity to delve deeper into the legal insights that underpin my argument. Drawing on my experience as a judge, I began to articulate the principles of property rights that I believed had been overlooked by the HOA. I pointed out that homeowners have a fundamental right to use their property as they see fit, provided they adhere to established community standards. In this case, parking in my driveway was not just permissible, it was my right. I emphasized that the HOA's actions violated not only my personal freedoms, but also the spirit of the governing documents that outlined their authority. I referenced specific clauses in our community bylaws that required clear communication and fair enforcement rules. The absence of prior notice regarding any changes to parking policies was a glaring oversight that undermined their position. As I spoke, I could see some board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. I pressed on, highlighting potential legal repercussions for enforcing penalties without proper justification. My intent was not merely to defend myself, but also to remind them of their responsibility to act within the bounds of the law. I shared examples from previous cases where homeowners successfully challenged similar overreaches by HOAs, illustrating that when residents stand up for their rights, they can effect meaningful change. The room filled with murmurs as other homeowners began to nod in agreement, realizing that this wasn't solely about my car. It was about establishing a precedent for fairness and transparency in our community governance. My arguments were resonating, and I could sense a shift in the atmosphere. As the meeting progressed, the atmosphere shifted from one of tension to palpable engagement. The community's reaction to my confrontation with the HOA was a mix of surprise, curiosity, and solidarity. Homeowners who had previously remained silent began to voice their own frustrations about the HOA's overreach. It was clear that my situation resonated with many who had felt stifled by overly strict regulations or faced penalties without proper justification. Several residents spoke up, sharing their own experiences of being unfairly targeted for minor infractions. They recounted tales of receiving citations for trivial matters, such as a flower bed that didn't meet the HOA's aesthetic guidelines or a temporarily parked guest vehicle. Their stories highlighted a growing sentiment that the HOA's authority was being wielded with an iron fist, often at the expense of personal freedoms. I could see nods of agreement and hear murmurs of support from around the room. Neighbors who had once been hesitant to challenge the status quo were now emboldened to speak out, driven by a collective sense of injustice. A few even expressed gratitude for my willingness to confront the board, recognizing that it sparked a much-needed discussion about community governance. By the end of the meeting, what began as a solitary battle against an unjust penalty transformed into a rallying cry for homeowners to reclaim their voices. We were no longer just individuals facing a powerful entity. We were a community united in our desire for fairness and transparency. The reaction was not only encouraging, but also signaled a turning point for our neighborhood, a moment where we could redefine our relationship with authority and advocate for our rights together. As the meeting reached its climax, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The HOA board, realizing they were outmatched by both my legal arguments and the mounting support from residents, called for a brief recess to discuss their next steps. I could feel the weight of the moment. This was not just about retrieving my car, but about holding the HOA accountable for their overreach. When the board reconvened, their demeanor had shifted. They acknowledged the concerns raised by myself and other homeowners, recognizing that they needed to reassess their approach to enforcement. After much deliberation, they agreed to lift the clamp on my vehicle immediately and promised to review their policies regarding parking regulations. The decision was met with applause from the audience, a collective sigh of relief echoing throughout the room. Moreover, the board proposed a community forum to reevaluate existing rules and ensure that all homeowners were informed of any changes moving forward. They recognized that clear communication would be vital in preventing future misunderstandings and conflicts. As I listened to their commitment, I felt a sense of accomplishment wash over me, not just for myself, but for my fellow residents who had long felt voiceless. The resolution of this conflict marked a significant turning point in our community. What began as an unjust clamping incident transformed into an opportunity for dialogue and reform. Together, we had advocated for change, setting a precedent for greater transparency and fairness in our HOA's governance. It was clear that we were no longer simply passive participants in our community. We were empowered homeowners ready to stand up for our rights. As I reflected on the events that had unfolded, I realized that this experience had profoundly reshaped my understanding of authority and community. What began as a personal dispute over parking regulations had evolved into a larger commentary on the balance of power within our neighborhood. It became clear that while HOAs have a responsibility to maintain order, they must also recognize and respect the individual rights of homeowners. The confrontation with the HOA not only allowed me to reclaim my car, but also ignited a collective awareness among residents about the importance of advocacy and accountability. It was heartening to witness neighbors who had once felt apprehensive about challenging the board now stepping forward to voice their concerns. This newfound courage signaled a shift in our community dynamics, one where residents felt empowered to engage in discussions about governance and to hold authority accountable. I also reflected on the role of communication in fostering a healthy community. The commitment from the HOA to establish forums for dialogue underscored the necessity of transparency in decision-making processes. When residents are informed and involved, it not only enhances trust,